Rohan Malhotra and Ananya Verma were supposed to be the perfect couple, celebrated by friends and family on their wedding day. But what no one knew was that Rohan's charming smile hid a deadly secret. Months of lies, manipulation, and a meticulously planned fake marriage scam were about to explode in the most shocking way, turning a day of joy into a nightmare of betrayal and deadly revenge. Rohan Malhotra arrived in the UK as an international student carrying ambition that far outweighed his preparation. He came from a modest middle-class family in India who had sold land and borrowed money to fund his education. At first, life abroad felt exciting and promising. He attended classes regularly, worked part-time, and blended into the crowd of foreign students chasing better futures. But behind the routine, pressure quietly built. His grades slipped, attendance warnings appeared, and his student visa renewal became uncertain. Each letter from the university felt heavier than the last. As months passed, rent increased and job hours were cut. Rohan stopped sending positive updates home and began lying about his progress. The fear of returning to India as a failure haunted him constantly. He avoided classmates who asked about future plans and spent nights scrolling through online forums about visa extensions. That was when he discovered stories of students who stayed back through marriage arrangements that existed only on paper. The idea felt wrong at first, but desperation softened his morals. Soon, Rohan connected with underground agents who promised a simple solution. They explained how fake marriages worked, how families could be convinced, and how documents could be managed. All it required was money and commitment until residency was secured. Rohan convinced himself it was temporary, that no one would truly be harmed. He stopped thinking about consequences and focused only on survival. Slowly, his personality changed. He became secretive, calculating, and emotionally distant. What looked like a hard-working student to outsiders was actually a young man building a lie piece by piece. The more trapped he felt, the more determined he became to escape at any cost. Without realizing it, Rohan had already stepped onto a path where there was no easy way back. Ananya Verma had grown up in London between two worlds, balancing modern independence with traditional expectations at home. Her parents wanted stability above all else, believing marriage was the safest path for their daughter's future. Ananya worked at a small finance firm, lived responsibly, and rarely questioned her family's wishes. When a proposal arrived through trusted community connections, it felt natural to consider it seriously. Rohan's profile appeared ideal on paper: an Indian student, educated, soft-spoken, and eager to settle down. Background checks through relatives revealed nothing alarming, and the urgency around the wedding was explained as visa timelines and family convenience. Ananya met Rohan only a few times before the engagement was finalized. He seemed reserved but respectful, someone carrying quiet stress rather than bad intentions. His stories about struggling abroad sounded believable and even earned sympathy from her parents. The families agreed quickly, proud that the match seemed sensible and respectable. Wedding preparations moved faster than Ananya expected, but she trusted the elders guiding the process. She focused on logistics, rituals, and adjusting her life to welcome a husband. Behind the scenes, Rohan was living a double life. While Ananya chose fabrics and dates, he signed agreements with an illegal immigration network. Payments were scheduled, and fake affidavits were prepared to show a relationship that did not truly exist. For Rohan, Ananya was not a partner, but a solution. For Ananya, Rohan was a promise of companionship and stability. Small warning signs appeared, but went unnoticed. Rohan avoided long conversations, showed little curiosity about shared plans, and insisted on handling legal paperwork alone. Ananya sensed distance, but blamed cultural differences and stress. She believed trust would grow after marriage. What she did not know was that the foundation of the relationship was already built on deception, and the wedding was never meant to be a beginning, only a transaction with a deadline. As the wedding date approached, tension surrounded Rohan like a shadow he could not escape. Every reminder notification from the university and every unknown phone call made his heart race. Immigration officers had already begun quietly reviewing his case due to inconsistencies in past applications. Rohan sensed danger but did not know where it would come from. Instead of slowing down, he rushed everything, believing speed was his only protection. He pushed for quick registrations, limited guest lists, and minimal documentation, presenting it all as simplicity rather than control. Ananya, meanwhile, tried to adjust to his emotional distance. She noticed how Rohan avoided discussions about future plans, housing arrangements, and finances. Whenever legal matters were mentioned, he redirected the topic or insisted that everything was under control. His need to handle documents alone felt strange, but elders reassured her that paperwork often stressed grooms. Wanting peace, she chose silence over suspicion. Behind closed doors, Rohan's fear grew into paranoia. He began deleting messages, changing phones, and avoiding public places. The agents who had promised him safety now demanded faster payments and stricter cooperation. They reminded him that backing out was not an option. Trapped between deportation and exposure, Rohan felt cornered. The fake marriage was no longer just a plan, it was his final lifeline. At the same time, Ananya started sensing an emotional void. There was no warmth, no excitement, only urgency. She felt like an obligation rather than a partner. Still, she blamed herself for expecting too much before marriage. Family pressure and social expectations kept her moving forward. What neither of them knew was that systems larger than their fears were already in motion. Data mismatches, flagged records, and digital trails were aligning quietly. While wedding invitations were being sent and rituals prepared, an invisible countdown had begun. Each passing hour pulled them closer to a moment where truth and lies would collide, leaving no one unchanged. 2 days before the wedding, Ananya stayed back late to organize shared digital files that Rohan had asked her to print. While sorting folders on his laptop, she noticed documents labeled with unfamiliar names and dates that did not match their timeline. Curiosity turned into unease as she opened them. Inside were scanned affidavits claiming a long relationship, bank transfer receipts to unknown individuals, and drafted statements describing a marriage that clearly did not reflect reality. The language was formal, legal, and cold. Nothing about it felt personal or genuine. Ananya's hands trembled as patterns emerged. The payments were scheduled around the wedding date. The affidavits repeated the same phrases she had seen online in immigration forms. A sudden clarity hit her. The marriage was being used as proof, not a promise. Fear mixed with shame as she realized how close she was to becoming part of something illegal. Her first instinct was to confront Rohan, but the scale of the deception made her pause. If he could hide this much, she wondered what else he was capable of. She spent the night researching quietly, learning about fake marriage rings and the risks faced by unsuspecting spouses. The consequences were severe, including legal trouble and long-term damage to reputation. Ananya thought about her parents, their trust, and the life she had planned. By morning, she made a decision that felt both protective and devastating. Using an anonymous channel, she submitted the documents to authorities, carefully explaining what she had found without revealing her identity. She hoped intervention would stop the wedding quietly and prevent public fallout. After sending the report, she deleted her browsing history and returned the laptop exactly as she had found it. Outwardly, preparations continued as normal. Inside, Ananya carried a heavy secret, unaware that her attempt to avoid harm had already set forces in motion that could not be controlled. The wedding day began with color, music, and carefully staged happiness. Guests gathered early, unaware that the celebration rested on a fragile lie. Ananya moved through the rituals with a calm expression that hid exhaustion and fear. Rohan appeared tense, his smiles forced, and eyes constantly scanning the room. He believed that once the legal registration was completed, everything else would fade into formality. For him, the ceremony was not emotional but strategic, a final checkpoint before safety. At the registration office, routine questions turned unexpectedly detailed. Officials requested additional identification, relationship proof, and timelines that went beyond the prepared documents. Rohan's confidence slipped. Small inconsistencies began surfacing, addresses that did not match, dates that overlapped incorrectly, and financial records that raised suspicion. The atmosphere shifted from celebratory to uneasy. Guests sensed something was wrong, though no one yet understood what. Ananya watched silently as the truth unraveled in real time. Officers stepped aside, reviewed files, and returned with firm expressions. They informed the families that the marriage could not proceed due to serious legal concerns. Moments later, Rohan was separated from the group for questioning. Whispers spread quickly. Phones were pulled out. Shock replaced joy. The halted ceremony felt surreal. Decorations remained untouched, but the meaning behind them collapsed. Ananya felt exposed, humiliated, and numb. Her parents struggled to process the sudden disgrace, while Rohan stood frozen, realizing his carefully constructed plan had failed publicly and completely. Immigration officers confirmed that the marriage was part of a suspected fraud scheme, leaving no room for negotiation. What was meant to be a legal shield turned into a spotlight. Rohan's future unraveled in front of everyone he had hoped to deceive. The wedding ended not with vows or blessings, but with unanswered questions, broken trust, and a silence that felt heavier than any accusation. By nightfall, Rohan had disappeared from public view. After hours of questioning, he was released temporarily under investigation, but the damage was already done. His phone was switched off, his rented room abandoned, and his social media wiped clean. Authorities searched hostels, libraries, and part-time workplaces, but Rohan seemed to have vanished into the city's margins. The shame of exposure burned deeper than fear of arrest. In his mind, everything he had worked toward had been stolen in a single day. Ananya returned home in silence, surrounded by relatives who spoke in hushed voices. Though the fraud was not hers, the weight of public embarrassment settled heavily on her shoulders. She replayed every moment, wondering if she had missed earlier signs. Sleep became difficult, and anxiety followed her into daily routines. Still, she believed the worst was over now that the truth had surfaced. Rohan, meanwhile, hid in an abandoned student flat scheduled for renovation. Surrounded by dust and darkness, he spiraled into obsession. He fixated on one thought, that Ananya had betrayed him. The investigation, the humiliation, the collapse of his future all became, in his mind, her fault. Online searches replaced rational thought. He tracked her workplace, her commute, and her habits through fragments of information still accessible to him. What had once been desperation turned into resentment, and resentment hardened into anger. Rohan convinced himself that he had been wronged, ignoring his own choices and crimes. The more isolated he became, the more distorted his thinking grew. Each hour alone deepened his fixation. Authorities believed Rohan was preparing to flee the country, unaware that his intentions had shifted. Survival was no longer his goal. Instead, he focused on reclaiming control in the only way he thought remained possible. Unseen and unstable, Rohan crossed an invisible line, transforming from a failed scammer into a looming threat driven by obsession and revenge. 3 days after the failed wedding, Ananya tried to return to a sense of normalcy. She resumed work, avoided social gatherings, and kept her movements predictable, believing the situation would slowly fade. She did not know she was being watched. Rohan had begun following her from a distance, blending into crowds and memorizing routines. CCTV footage later revealed him lingering near bus stops, coffee shops, and street corners she passed daily. Each sighting fed his distorted belief that confrontation was inevitable. On the morning of the attack, Rohan purchased a knife from a local store, paying in cash but leaving behind digital records through surveillance cameras. His actions were calm, almost methodical. There was no visible panic, only a grim focus shaped by days of isolation and obsessive thinking. He waited until evening, choosing a poorly lit street near Ananya's route home where foot traffic was low. When Ananya turned into the quiet lane, she sensed movement behind her but had no time to react. The attack was sudden and violent, shattering the fragile calm of the neighborhood. Nearby residents heard screams and rushed toward the sound as Rohan fled the scene. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the injuries were severe. Ananya was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. The city was stunned by the brutality. What began as an immigration fraud investigation had escalated into a homicide within days. News outlets struggled to connect the dots, while investigators secured the crime scene and collected evidence. Bloodstains, fingerprints, and witness accounts painted a clear picture of premeditation. Rohan disappeared again, but this time he left behind a trail that could not be erased. Surveillance footage, purchase records, and phone data began aligning rapidly. The act of revenge he believed would restore control instead sealed his fate, transforming him from a suspect into a wanted murderer and turning a personal deception into a public tragedy that shook the entire community. The murder triggered an immediate citywide response. Streets near the crime scene were sealed, and forensic teams worked through the night collecting evidence. Media helicopters circled overhead as news alerts spread rapidly, transforming a quiet neighborhood into the center of national attention. What shocked the public most was the speed of escalation. A failed wedding had turned into a deadly crime in less than a week, raising urgent questions about warning signs that had gone unnoticed. Investigators moved quickly, piecing together Rohin's movements hour by hour. CCTV footage from shops, buses, and street cameras mapped his path with disturbing clarity. The knife purchase was traced to a small hardware store, where timestamps aligned perfectly with surveillance images. Phone records showed deleted calls and location pings that contradicted his claims of disappearance. Every attempt Rohin made to erase his tracks only added more proof of intent. The community reacted with fear and anger. Candlelight vigils were held for Ananya, attended by people who had never met her but felt shaken by the senseless loss. Advocacy groups highlighted the dangers of immigration fraud networks and the risks faced by unsuspecting partners. Ananya's family remained out of public view, devastated by grief and overwhelmed by guilt they did not deserve. Rohin was spotted 2 days later at a bus terminal on the edge of the city. He had shaved his beard and changed clothes, but his face was quickly recognized. Armed officers arrested him without resistance. He carried no luggage, no money, and no clear plan beyond escape. As he was taken into custody, investigators confirmed that the case against him was overwhelming. The arrest brought relief, but not closure. A life had been taken, trust had been destroyed, and a community was left questioning how desperation and deceit could spiral so quickly into irreversible violence. The trial exposed the full scale of deception behind the crime. Prosecutors laid out a clear timeline showing how Rohin's immigration troubles led him into a network that specialized in fake marriages. Financial records revealed payments made for forged documents, legal coaching, and staged relationship proof. Investigators connected his case to several others, uncovering a wider operation that preyed on vulnerable students facing visa expiration. What first appeared to be an isolated act was now part of a much larger criminal pattern. Medical reports and forensic evidence detailed the violence of the attack, leaving little room for doubt about intent. CCTV footage showed Rohin following Ananya repeatedly in the days before her death, proving the act was planned rather than impulsive. Digital evidence revealed searches related to evading police and weapon purchases. Each detail reinforced the image of a man who had chosen revenge over responsibility. In court, Rohin showed little emotion. His isolation and entitlement became central themes as experts described how prolonged stress, fear of failure, and refusal to accept consequences had shaped his actions. The court rejected any attempt to shift blame. It was made clear that Ananya had acted to protect herself and others from a crime, not to harm him. The verdict was swift. Rohin was convicted of murder and immigration fraud, receiving a life sentence with no possibility of early release. Additional arrests followed as authorities dismantled the fake marriage network he had relied on. The courtroom outcome brought a sense of justice, but it could not undo the damage. Ananya's family listened quietly as the sentence was read. While the ruling closed the legal chapter, their loss remained permanent. The case became a defining example of how unchecked deception and obsession can destroy innocent lives and ripple far beyond the original crime. Arjun Patel had always been ambitious, a bright Indian student pursuing a master's degree in the UK, but beneath his polished exterior lay a calculating mind. He had meticulously crafted a plan months before, a plan that involved Maya Sharma, a fellow student from Delhi, whom he approached with charm and subtle manipulation. Their initial meetings seemed innocent, a mutual interest in studies and cultural exchange, yet Arjun's intentions were far darker. He proposed marriage under the guise of love and companionship, convincing Maya that their union would secure both their futures, especially with the looming threat of visa complications for international students. Maya, trusting and optimistic, believed in his sincerity, unaware of the intricate web of deceit he had woven. Invitations were sent, venues booked, and families involved, creating an illusion of a grand, joyous occasion. On the morning of the wedding, The air was thick with anticipation and nervous excitement. Friends and relatives gathered, dressed in vibrant colors, while photographers captured every detail of the preparation. Arjun, in a tailored suit, projected an aura of confidence and respectability, masking the storm brewing within. Behind closed doors, Maya reviewed the final arrangements, unaware of the sinister revelations about to unfold. The ceremony hall glittered with decorations, soft music playing in the background, yet every smile concealed the tension that would erupt. As guests began to arrive, a subtle sense of unease lingered, a feeling that something was amiss, though no one could pinpoint what. The day, meant to celebrate union and joy, was on the verge of becoming a stage for shocking truths, betrayal, and the beginning of a deadly chain reaction that would leave everyone questioning how love could be so ruthlessly weaponized.